The evening had started like any other in the quiet town. The streets were calm, the lights from houses glowed softly, and only the distant sound of crickets filled the air. Officer Mark Davis sat in his patrol car, slowly driving along the edge of the woods that bordered the town. He had been on the force for almost 15 years, and nights like these usually passed without trouble. Still, he stayed alert, watching the road and the tree line, listening for anything out of place. It was then that something caught his attention. At first, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. A shadow darted across the headlights. He slowed the car and squinted into the darkness. Suddenly, a dog appeared right in front of the car, barking loudly. Mark hit the brakes hard, the tires screeching as the car stopped only a few feet away from the animal. For a moment, Mark froze. The dog wasn't acting like a stray. It wasn't running off in fear, nor was it growling. Instead, it barked sharply, almost in a desperate rhythm, as if it wanted him to notice something. Its fur was muddy, its chest rising and falling quickly from exhaustion, and its eyes shone with a strange urgency. Mark rolled down his window and spoke calmly. "Hey there, buddy. What are you doing out here?" But the dog didn't respond the way normal strays would. It circled the car, barking again, then stopped at the driver's side door, pawing the ground, looking directly at him. It was as if the animal was demanding he get out. Mark noticed the collar around its neck. This wasn't just anyone's pet. The thick leather strap and the tag that glinted in the headlights told him it was trained. Then he saw the patch attached to it, a K9 unit marker. His heart skipped a beat. This was no ordinary dog. This was a police dog. Questions flooded his mind. Where was the handler? Why was the dog alone? Why was it in such a frantic state? Something was very wrong. The dog barked again, more urgent this time, and ran a few steps toward the woods. Then it stopped, turned back, and looked at him with wide, almost pleading eyes. It barked again, tail stiff, body tense, before darting a little further into the dark tree line. Mark's instincts as a cop kicked in. He quickly grabbed his radio. "Dispatch, this is Officer Davis. I've got a lone K9 on Route 14 by the East Woods. Dog looks trained, possibly lost from its handler. I'm checking it out." "Stand by." The radio crackled with the dispatcher's voice. "Copy that, Davis. Proceed with caution. Keep us updated." Mark put the car in park and stepped out. The cool night air brushed his face as he clicked on his flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, but the dog didn't wait. It barked again, then bolted into the woods. "Hey, wait!" Mark called out, though he knew the dog couldn't really understand his words. Still, it seemed to know he was following, because every few yards it would stop, bark, and look back at him before moving forward again. The ground was uneven, covered in fallen leaves that crunched under his boots. Branches brushed against his arms as he pushed deeper into the woods, the flashlight beam bouncing with each step. The dog's barks echoed ahead, guiding him. There was no hesitation in the animal's path. It knew exactly where it was going. Mark's mind raced as he followed. He knew K9s were trained to stay with their handlers unless ordered otherwise. For a dog like this to run into town and flag down another officer, something must have gone terribly wrong. The thought of an injured handler, alone in the woods with no way to call for help, tightened his chest. He picked up his pace, radioing again as he ran. "Dispatch, the K9 is leading me into the woods. Requesting backup and medics on standby. Something's not right out here. Copy, Davis. Units are on the way." The forest grew darker the deeper he went. The tall trees blocked out much of the moonlight, and the air smelled damp like wet earth and moss. He could hear the dog up ahead still barking, sometimes whining. Each sound pushed him forward. Finally, he broke into a small clearing. The dog stood there, panting heavily, waiting for him. Its body shook with both exhaustion and determination. When it saw him, it barked once more, then darted again toward a slope that led deeper into the woods. Mark stopped for a moment to catch his breath. He looked at the animal and muttered almost to himself, "All right, I'm coming. Show me what you need me to see." The dog didn't wait. It leapt down the slope, barking as it disappeared into the shadows. Mark tightened his grip on the flashlight and carefully followed, sliding on the dirt, grabbing onto branches to steady himself. Something about this moment felt unlike any call he had ever taken. It wasn't just a routine check. It was as if he and the dog were connected in a silent understanding, that every second mattered, that someone's life might depend on this chase. And though Mark didn't know what he was about to find, he felt a chill run down his spine. The night was no longer quiet. It was filled with a desperate urgency, led by a loyal creature that refused to give up until help arrived. Mark steadied himself at the bottom of the slope, his flashlight beam bouncing wildly as he caught his breath. The ground was damp, soft with moss and leaves, and the night air felt colder here. The woods were thick, almost swallowing sound except for the dog's urgent barking. Each bark echoed and guided him, as though the animal was pulling him forward with invisible strings. The dog paused a short distance away, waiting for him, its chest rising and falling in heavy breaths. When Mark took a step closer, the dog spun and sprinted deeper into the trees. Its body language was clear. "Follow me, don't stop." Mark's boots sank slightly into the wet soil as he moved, flashlight sweeping across the undergrowth. His ears strained for any other noise, maybe a voice, maybe movement, but all he heard was his own heartbeat and the sharp barks from the K9. He spoke into his radio again, keeping his tone steady even though his pulse was racing. "Dispatch. Officer Davis still in pursuit with K9. Entered deep woods about half a mile off Route 14, requesting backup to triangulate location. Dog seems to be leading me with purpose." The dispatcher answered quickly, her voice calm but alert. "Copy that, Davis. Units are heading your way. Stay on channel." Mark felt a small sense of relief. He wasn't entirely alone out here, but at the same time he knew time mattered. If the handler was in danger, minutes could mean everything. The dog barked again, this time more urgently, and Mark quickened his pace. Branches snapped under his boots. A low branch whipped across his shoulder as he pushed forward. He gritted his teeth and pressed on. The dog darted over fallen logs with the agility of an animal trained for rough terrain, pausing only to check that he was keeping up. "Good boy," Mark muttered, half encouragement for the dog, half for himself. The forest thickened. His flashlight picked out tangled roots, thick bushes, and the glint of wet leaves. Every sound made his nerves buzz. A nightbird screeched from somewhere high above, and for a second it sounded almost like a human cry. Mark froze, his heart jumping into his throat. Then he realized it was only an owl and shook his head, forcing himself to keep moving. The dog suddenly stopped near a shallow creek, its paws splashing in the cold water. It barked, looked back at Mark, then crossed quickly. Mark followed, the water soaking into his boots. He felt the chill climb up his legs, but he ignored it. He kept his eyes locked on the dog's dark shape moving just ahead. Then something new reached his ears. A faint sound, so faint he wondered if he had imagined it. It wasn't the bark of the dog or the call of an animal. It was something human. A weak voice strained, maybe calling out. Mark froze, his breath caught in his chest. "Hello? Police, call out if you can hear me!" he shouted into the night. The woods answered with silence, then another faint cry drifted through the trees. This time there was no mistaking it. Someone was out there. The dog barked sharply and ran toward the sound. Mark followed, his heart racing faster now. The voice wasn't loud. It was weak, broken, as though whoever it belonged to didn't have the strength to call for long. Mark stumbled over a root, caught himself against a tree, then kept going. His flashlight beam bounced ahead, cutting through branches, finding glimpses of the dog weaving forward. The cries grew a little clearer, enough to hear the pain in them. He pressed his radio. "Dispatch, I've got possible contact." Human voice heard, requesting immediate medical assistance. "Moving in." "Copy, Davis. Rescue units en route." The dog stopped again at the edge of a steep incline. The ground dropped suddenly, and below, through the tangled brush, Mark could just barely see movement. He aimed the flashlight and spotted a reflective patch, shiny material that looked like part of a uniform. His heart pounded. "Officer down," he muttered to himself. He lowered himself carefully down the incline, sliding on loose dirt, grabbing roots to slow his descent. His flashlight beam lit up the figure at the bottom, a man in police gear lying on his side, half covered by branches and leaves. His face was pale, his lips tight with pain. Mark recognized him instantly. Officer Ryan, a fellow cop who worked with the K9 unit. The injured officer lifted his head weakly and tried to speak. "Davis, thank God. Max found you." "Don't move," Mark said quickly, kneeling beside him. "Help is on the way. Just hang in there." Max, the dog, rushed to his handler's side, whining, licking his hand, staying close. The bond between them was unbreakable, and even in his weakened state, Ryan lifted his fingers to touch the dog's fur. Mark scanned the scene. Ryan's leg was pinned under a heavy branch and the angle looked bad. Probably broken. His radio was smashed on the ground nearby, useless. Mark realized the situation in an instant. Ryan had fallen, gotten trapped, and his equipment had failed. Without the dog's decision to leave and get help, no one would have known he was here. Mark's throat tightened at the thought. He pressed his radio. Dispatch, I've located Officer Ryan, K9 handler. He's injured and trapped under debris. Send rescue units to my coordinates immediately. Repeat, immediate response needed. The dispatcher's voice came back quickly, firm. Rescue is en route, Davis. Hold position, keep him stable if you can. Mark put a hand on Ryan's shoulder. You're going to be okay. Just stay with me. Ryan tried to smile weakly. Didn't think Max would leave me. But he knew. He knew what to do. Mark glanced at the dog, who sat alert by his handler, ears perked, eyes watching every move. The animal seemed to understand every word. Mark shook his head in quiet amazement. The night no longer felt silent or empty. It was filled with the weight of urgency. The sound of the wounded man's shallow breaths and the steady presence of a dog who had refused to give up. And even though rescue had not yet arrived, Mark knew one thing for certain. This animal had saved a life tonight. He tightened his grip on the flashlight, listening carefully for the distant sounds of approaching sirens. Somewhere behind the trees, faint but steady, the echoes of help were finally drawing closer. Mark stayed low beside the injured officer. His flashlight balanced on the ground so he could use both hands. The beam lit up Ryan's face, pale and strained with pain. His lips trembled as he tried to breathe through it. The fallen branch across his leg was thick and heavy, far too large for Mark to move by himself. He could only offer words of comfort until help arrived. You're safe now, Mark said softly, keeping his voice steady. Stay awake. Just keep talking to me. Ryan's eyes fluttered. Radio broke, he whispered. Couldn't. Call out. Mark nodded, glancing down at the shattered device half buried in leaves. I see that. Don't worry about it. Your partner here made sure you weren't alone. He reached out to pat the dog, Max, who still sat close to Ryan, refusing to leave. The animal's body trembled with both exhaustion and determination, his eyes darting between his handler and Mark, as if waiting for instructions. You did good, Max. Mark muttered. Real good. The forest seemed heavier now, the night air pressing in with silence. Mark strained his ears, waiting for any sound of approaching help. The woods muffled distant noise, but he thought he heard faint sirens far away. Time dragged, every second feeling longer than the last. He checked his watch. Only minutes had passed since he called for backup, but it felt like hours. He pressed the radio again. Dispatch, status on rescue. The reply crackled through. Davis, units are closing in. Estimated 10 minutes, 10 minutes. It felt far too long. Mark forced a calm breath and looked back at Ryan. His fellow officer was fighting to stay conscious, his face tightening with each wave of pain. Mark placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Listen to me, Ryan. You've made it this far. Max did his job, and now it's my turn. You're going to get out of this. Ryan gave the faintest nod, his lips forming a weak smile. Knew he'd find someone, he whispered. His hand reached out shakily to stroke the dog's head. Max responded with a soft whine and licked his hand gently, as if reminding him that he wasn't going anywhere. Mark studied the situation again. The tree limb pinning Ryan's leg wasn't just heavy. It had twisted at an awkward angle when it fell, trapping him tight. Trying to lift it alone would be useless, maybe even dangerous. He knew moving it without medical gear could worsen the injury. All he could do was keep Ryan calm, keep him talking, and wait for the rescuers to arrive. Tell me what happened, Mark said carefully, hoping to keep him focused. Ryan took a shallow breath. We were tracking. Call came in. Possible break-in near edge of woods. Followed tracks. Ground gave out, slid down. Branch came with me. His words came slow, broken by sharp breaths. Mark listened closely, nodding. You did everything right. Sometimes things just happen out here. But you're tough and you're going to walk out of here. Ryan gave a tired laugh that turned into a cough. Don't feel tough. Doesn't matter how you feel right now, Mark said firmly. What matters is you're alive, and you'll keep it that way until we get you to the hospital. The flashlight flickered slightly as the battery strained, and Mark adjusted it so the beam stayed steady on Ryan's leg. Max gave a soft bark, then perked his ears. Mark paused, listening. There it was, the faint crunch of leaves and breaking branches somewhere in the distance. Help was getting closer. Did you hear that? Mark asked, leaning closer to Ryan. That's backup. They're almost here. Ryan's eyes brightened a little, a flicker of relief showing through the pain. Mark pressed the radio again. Dispatch, confirm. I hear units approaching. A reply came quickly. Confirmed, Davis. First responders should be reaching your area any minute. Stay visible if possible. Mark angled the flashlight upward and tapped the side of it, sending beams of light flicking through the trees in case rescuers could spot it. He let out a long breath, feeling tension ease just slightly. The dog barked again, louder this time, almost as if cheering for the sound of approaching people. Max paced in a small circle, then returned to Ryan's side, lowering himself to the ground protectively. The noise of rescuers grew louder until Mark finally saw the glow of flashlights weaving between the trees. Voices called out sharp but steady. "Officer Davis, call back if you can hear us. Over here," Mark shouted, standing and waving his light. "We've got an injured officer down here. Need medical and extraction tools." Within moments, figures in rescue gear appeared, moving quickly but carefully down the slope. The sight of them brought a rush of relief to Mark's chest. He stepped back slightly, giving them room but stayed close enough to help if needed. One medic knelt immediately beside Ryan, checking his pulse and speaking to him gently. Another rescuer examined the tree branch, frowning at the weight and position. They quickly began unloading gear, ropes, cutting tools, splints, and a stretcher. The clearing that had felt so silent only minutes ago was now buzzing with activity. Mark stood beside Max, resting a hand on the dog's head. "See, you did it. You brought them here." The dog pressed against his leg for a moment, eyes locked on his handler as if unwilling to look anywhere else. As rescuers worked, Mark helped shine the flashlight steady on the scene. He watched them carefully cut away smaller branches, secure Ryan with straps, and prepared to lift the heavier log with teamwork and tools. Each step was done quickly but with precision. They knew time mattered. Ryan's face tightened in pain when they shifted the branch, but he stayed conscious, squeezing Max's fur for strength. The dog whined but didn't move, staying steady against him. "Easy now," one medic said. "We've got you. Almost free." Mark kept his eyes on Ryan, offering steady words. "You're doing great. Just hang on. You'll be out in a minute." The branch finally gave way with a grunt from the rescuers, and they slid it aside. Ryan gasped sharply but then sagged in relief as they quickly splinted his leg. With practiced movements, they lifted him gently onto the stretcher, securing him with straps. Max barked once, sharp and proud, as though announcing the job was done. Mark exhaled deeply, feeling his chest finally loosen. For the first time all night, he believed things were going to be okay. The night that had felt so dark only moments ago suddenly came alive with movement and light. What had been a lonely clearing lit only by Mark's small flashlight was now filled with beams cutting through the trees from every direction. Dozens of rescuers poured into the woods, their heavy boots thudding against the earth, their voices sharp and organized as they worked together. "Clear this path," one rescuer called. "Bring the stretcher through." Floodlights were set up quickly, throwing bright white light across the clearing. The forest that had seemed cold and endless only minutes before now looked almost like a stage, with people swarming from every angle. Equipment bags hit the ground, ropes were uncoiled, and medics leaned close to the injured officer, checking his vital signs while others secured his leg. Mark stood back just a little, letting the professionals work, but he kept close enough to help when needed. His eyes stayed fixed on Ryan, who now lay strapped to the stretcher. Though his face was pale and sweat dripped from his forehead, there was a new look of relief in his eyes. He wasn't alone anymore. The dog, Max, stood right by him. No matter how many people crowded into the clearing, the K9 never moved more than a few inches from its handler's side. When medics leaned in, the dog's ears twitched nervously. But when Ryan's hand reached out weakly to touch its fur, Max calmed down again. It was as though the animal drew its strength from that simple touch. The air filled with the sounds of rescue. Radios crackled as team leaders gave updates. Medics called for supplies. The hum of generators from the floodlights joined with the steady voices of men and women trained to save lives. The woods no longer felt still and lonely. They were alive with purpose. "Pulse is steady," one medic announced. "He's stable, but we need to move fast. Get him out of here and to the hospital." Mark stepped closer. "What's the route?" he asked. "We'll carry him up the incline," a rescuer answered, pointing toward the slope Mark had struggled down earlier. "We'll secure ropes. It'll take teamwork, but it's the fastest way." Mark nodded. He glanced up the slope, remembering how steep and rough it had been. It would be no easy task to carry a stretcher that way, especially in the dark. But with so many people working together, it could be done. The team worked quickly. Ropes were anchored to sturdy trees and rescuers positioned themselves along the slope. The stretcher was lifted carefully, every movement steady, every strap checked twice. Ryan groaned softly as he was moved, but his eyes stayed on Max, who trotted along close by as if refusing to let the stretcher out of his sight. "Easy now," a rescuer said, "one step at a time." Slowly, with precision, they began the climb up the slope. Mark stayed near the middle, helping guide the stretcher, his flashlight beam steady on the path. Max moved alongside, scrambling up with surprising strength, his nails scratching against the dirt as he refused to fall behind. The climb was tense. Each step had to be careful. The stretcher wobbled once and all the rescuers froze, tightening their grips, waiting until the weight was steady again before moving on. Mark felt sweat drip down his face even in the cool night air. Every muscle in his arm strained as he held the rope tight, refusing to let it slip. Finally, with a push and a pull from all sides, they reached the top. The stretcher was pulled onto flat ground, and a wave of relief went through the team. They paused only long enough to catch their breath before moving again. "Ambulance is waiting near the road," someone shouted. Mark could hear it now, the faint rumble of the engine, the flashing red and blue lights cutting faint streaks through the trees ahead. The rescuers moved quickly, forming a path through the woods. Flashlights bobbed up and down, guiding every step. Branches snapped under their boots, and the stretcher was passed carefully from hand to hand. Through it all, Max stayed right beside Ryan, never once falling back. At one point, a rescuer tried to hold the leash to guide him away from the stretcher, but Max barked sharply and pulled back, his body tense with refusal. "Let him stay," Mark said quickly. "He needs to be there." The rescuer nodded and let go, and Max immediately pressed back against the stretcher, his head close to his handler's arm. They finally broke through the edge of the woods, and the sight ahead was almost blinding. Dozens more rescuers waited, the ambulance doors wide open, the floodlights making the clearing as bright as day. Radios buzzed, equipment clattered, and voices rose above the chaos. For a small town, it looked like half the emergency crews had shown up. "Bring him in! Bring him in!" shouted a paramedic by the ambulance. The stretcher was lifted higher, carried swiftly toward the waiting vehicle. Mark stayed close, watching every movement. Ryan's eyes blinked against the sudden brightness, but his hand never let go of Max's fur. The dog kept stride perfectly, barking once as if announcing to everyone that his partner was still here. Still alive. The rescuers swarmed around the ambulance, some clearing space, others preparing medical gear inside. The stretcher was slid carefully in, medics immediately hooking up monitors and checking vitals again. Ryan groaned but managed to whisper something. Mark leaned closer and caught the words. Don't leave Max, you have my word," Mark said firmly. "He's staying with you." The paramedics nodded, understanding. They made room for the K9, allowing the animal to sit just inside the doorway of the ambulance, pressed close to his handler's stretcher. Max's eyes darted around at the busy scene but always returned to Ryan. Mark stood outside the ambulance for a moment, breathing heavily, letting the scene settle in. The woods behind him still echoed with the sounds of cleanup, rescuers packing up ropes and equipment. But his eyes stayed on the ambulance, on the bond between the man and his dog. In the chaos of the night, in the flood of people and lights, one thing was clear. This rescue wasn't just about human teamwork. It had begun with the loyalty of one animal who refused to give up, who had braved the dark woods alone to find help. And now, with the ambulance doors closing, Mark felt a swell of respect for the silent hero who had made it all possible. The siren wailed as the ambulance pulled away, racing toward the hospital. Max sat inside, steady and calm, his eyes fixed on his partner. And though the night was still far from over, everyone who had witnessed it knew they had seen something remarkable. An act of devotion no one would ever forget. The hospital's bright lights replaced the shadows of the woods. The ambulance pulled up quickly and paramedics rushed Ryan inside on the stretcher. The automatic doors slid open with a soft whoosh and the smell of antiseptic filled the air. Nurses and doctors were already waiting, moving with practiced speed. Mark followed close behind, his heart still racing from everything that had happened. Max stayed right beside the stretcher, his nails clicking against the tile floor as he refused to leave his partner. Every time someone leaned over Ryan, Max lowered his head protectively, his sharp eyes never leaving the faces around the bed. "Vitals are dropping slightly," a nurse called out. "Let's get him into trauma room 2. Mark stood just outside as they wheeled Ryan in, watching as the doors swung closed. A nurse turned back and nodded at Max, allowing the dog to stay near. The animal slipped quietly into the room and sat by the bed, his body tense but calm, as though he understood he had to be strong now. Mark leaned against the wall, finally allowing himself to breathe. His uniform was streaked with dirt, his boots soaked from the creek. He hadn't realized until now how much his muscles ached from the climb and the chase, but the exhaustion was softened by relief. Relief that Ryan was alive, relief that help had come in time, and awe that a dog had made the difference. Minutes stretched on. Mark listened to the muffled sounds through the door, the steady rhythm of machines, the voices of doctors giving quick instructions, the rustle of equipment being used. Each moment felt heavy, but he trusted that Ryan was in good hands now. Finally, the doors opened and a doctor stepped out, pulling off his gloves. He looked tired but calm. "He's stable," the doctor said. "A broken leg, a few bruised ribs, some cuts. He lost a lot of strength out there, but he's going to recover." Mark let out a long breath he didn't realize he had been holding. "Thank God," he said softly. The doctor gave a small smile. "You got him here just in time. If he'd been out there much longer, the cold and the injury could have made things much worse." He paused, his eyes shifting toward the dog, sitting quietly at the side of the bed. "Though from what I hear, it wasn't just you who brought him back." Mark followed his gaze. Max rested his head on the edge of the hospital bed, watching his handler's face closely. Every time Ryan stirred, the dog's tail thumped softly against the floor. The bond between them was something words couldn't fully describe. Later that night, when Ryan was settled in his room, Mark sat nearby, listening as his fellow officer spoke in a weak but steady voice. "The ground gave way," Ryan explained, his voice hoarse. "I fell and the branch trapped me. My radio, it shattered in the fall. I tried to call, but nothing worked. I thought that was it." He paused, his hand moving slowly to rest on Max's head. But he stayed. He stayed until he realized no one was coming. "And then he left me. I thought I'd lost him, but I should have known better." He went to find help. Mark shook his head in quiet wonder. He ran straight into the road, right in front of my patrol car. He didn't run wild, didn't wander. He came to me like he knew exactly what he needed to do. He barked, circled, refused to leave until I followed him. "That's the only reason I found you in time." Ryan smiled faintly, his eyes glistening. "That's Max. He's more than just a dog. He's my partner." Word of the rescue spread quickly. By morning, the story was everywhere, in the police station, in the town, and soon on local news. Reporters gathered outside the hospital, cameras flashing as they tried to catch a glimpse of the hero dog. Neighbors stopped Mark in the street to ask if it was true. Children drew pictures of a police dog saving the day, taping them to the station walls. A few days later, when Ryan was strong enough, the department held a small gathering in the hospital courtyard. Officers lined up in uniform, townspeople gathered around, and Max sat proudly by his handler's wheelchair. His ears perked up at the sound of clapping and his tail wagged steadily as people cheered. The police chief stepped forward and cleared his throat. "Every day our officers risk their lives to protect this community. And every day our canine partners stand beside them ready to serve. What happened in the woods was nothing short of extraordinary. Officer Ryan's life was saved not just by teamwork, but by the loyalty and courage of his canine, Max." The crowd applauded again, louder this time. Ryan reached down and stroked Max's head, smiling weakly but proudly. The chief continued. "For his bravery, his quick thinking, and his devotion, we honor Max as a hero of this department." A medal was placed on Max's collar, and the dog barked once, loud and proud, as though he understood. The sound drew laughter and more applause from the crowd. Children ran forward afterward to pet him, their faces glowing with admiration. Mark stood nearby, watching the scene unfold. His chest swelled with quiet pride. He had seen many moments in his years of service, but this one stood out. It wasn't about guns or sirens or arrests. It was about a bond, between a man and his dog, between loyalty and survival, between instinct and trust. In the days that followed, the story reached beyond the town. News stations played the footage again and again. Headlines read, "Canine flags down officer, saves partner's life, and hero dog leads rescuers into woods." Messages of support poured in from across the country. People mailed treats and toys for Max, letters of thanks for Ryan and donations to support the K9 program. But for Ryan, the greatest reward was simpler. It was waking up every morning to see Max lying faithfully at the side of his bed, those sharp eyes always watching, always ready. It was the quiet reminder that in his darkest hour, when he thought he was finished, his partner had refused to give up on him. One evening, weeks later, when Ryan was finally able to walk again with crutches, he stood in the station lobby with Max at his side. Officers and townspeople stopped to shake his hand, to pat Max's head, to tell the story one more time. Ryan listened politely, but when the crowd thinned, he leaned down close to his dog and whispered words only Max could hear. "You saved me," he said softly, "and I'll never forget it." Max wagged his tail and nudged his head against Ryan's leg, as if to say that was all that mattered. And though the world would remember the story as an incredible rescue, for Ryan it was something even deeper. It was proof that loyalty sometimes comes in 4 legs, sharp eyes, and a bark that refuses to be ignored. It was proof that a dog's heart could be braver than anything people expected. The town would talk about it for years to come. Parents would tell their children the tale of the canine who didn't quit, and officers would share the memory during training sessions. But for Ryan, Mark, and everyone who had been there that night, the memory was far more than a story. It was a moment when devotion crossed into something unthinkable and saved a life.